Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Does the current stock market volatility have you wondering what's next? Even maybe giving you a slight hint of panic, should I say? Or definitely an overwhelming feeling of anxiety? Well, if you're feeling these emotions, you're not alone. It's a natural emotional response to chaos or change that could be occurring in your life, whether it's personal events, politics, and yes, even the stock market. Dr. Jennifer Dragonette is back with us to walk through how we can navigate these personal and financial anxieties. We delve into finding harmony between our rational and emotional minds, especially when facing fluctuating financial markets and the anxiety it can bring. But even during stressful situations, having a positive outlook and having established relationships with a trusted advisor or even close friend or family, and using gratitude lists can help maintain a sense of calm in uncertain times. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. Good morning, Dr. Jen. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. I'm doing well. How are you today?
I think our topic today is it kind of play on what we talked about last time with all of this political uncertainty and upheaval. And we're recording this on Wednesday, March 12th. And for those that may not know it, we're in the middle of another kind of meltdown, not political, well, maybe political, but more so in the stock market. So we've had about a 10%, what they call correction in the equity markets, whether it's the S&P 500 or the Dow or the NASDAQ. There's various, stock market indices that we all follow. And so I wanted to talk to you today about how people can try to take the anxiety out of seeing their account balances or portfolios go down. I've always, and I think I've hopefully gotten better at this over the 20 plus years I've been an advisor. I know the one thing not to do is tell people to remain calm. That's probably like one of the worst things that you can do. So I don't do that. At least I hope so. Clients that are listening, Tama families that are listening. But what I try to get across is that these are temporary blips, pieces of noise when you look at a long-term trajectory. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm meeting with my families on an annual basis is I'll be 49 as I'm looking at the calendar in 2 more months. So I like to take a chart of the S&P 500 index from the time I was born until like the day I'm meeting with a family. And if you look at it, it's going from the bottom left to the upper right. but it's not a straight line. And there's all these ups and downs. And there's another chart that I like to show too that has all these reasons to sell. And whether it's 9/11, a war, tariffs, you name it, there's always a reason to sell. But where's the reason to buy? There should always be a reason to buy based on not only my almost 49 years of being on this earth, but even further, like when you look at the stock market from like a 100-year perspective. And I think the other thing that catches people off guard that creates anxiety is when you have a situation over the last 3 years like we have, where we had 2023, the most indexes were up like 20%. 2024, again, most indexes were up 20%. And now this year, we're down about 10%. So people kind of get lulled into this false sense of, oh, it's just going to keep going up. And that's not always healthy. And we won't get into the details of this, but that's not always healthy for a stock market to do. It's just go straight up. There's got to be pullback, push forward, pullback, push forward. So as I went on that rant to try to set us up, is that there are a lot of people, and I don't think it really matters what age. I think older people that are 50 and older that are getting closer to retirement, they definitely feel more anxiety than they say a 40-year-old, a 30-year-old, or a 20-year-old. Most of the 20 and 30-year-olds I work with, they don't even know really what's going on in the market. But those that are getting that closer to retirement, those are the families that I'm more concerned about because they're more on edge. So with all that said, walk us through how you would talk to somebody that's facing that type of anxiety. And I think it has a lot of tie-ins to what we talked about last month with the political anxiety that we're going through, which it seems like it's going to just keep continuing.
It sure does. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said, Paul, and I'll try to remember a lot of those pieces because there are a few things that really rang true for me. One is I love your description of the market as a pullback, as that aggregate where it goes from the bottom left to the top right. And it's interesting because as a psychologist, I often use the stock market as an example of
Really?
Yes, I do actually. Which is funny that we're doing
me
it
more.
in reverse. I'll use it as an example, if I'm working with someone who's in recovery, let's say, from substance abuse, or someone who's trying to recover from trauma, I'll use that example that we don't typically see a straight shot recovery, right? Very few things in life go perfectly better and better and better. Right, exactly. And it's interesting because I think when we pull back from that in my therapy office, people can say, oh, right, the stock market goes up and down, and we expect that. We don't expect a linear shot. And so it helps me give an analogy for things like getting sober, where we might expect there to be some slips, some relapses, and hopefully the progress is generally in a positive direction over time. So what's interesting is when we're in the middle of that process is where we get the anxiety, when we have those little blips down. And I love that term blip. It feels a lot scarier than a downturn or a crash, right? Or even a correction, if you know what we're talking about. That, we can start to expect it. And I think part of what I try to do, which is easier said than done, is not hyper-focus on those little changes, not necessarily even check every day, every couple days. Maybe if we know or can anticipate or have someone on our side who's a financial advisor, we can agree on, maybe I'll look once a week. Maybe I'll look at it once every couple weeks. Maybe I won't look at it all, and I'll trust my advisor to tell me if we need to do something or if we need to move allocations or add money or take money out. That there's a way where when we're hyper-focused on something like any sort of change, the micro is probably not our best friend. Looking at it every hour is just going to bring up anxiety about things that fundamentally we don't have control over, right? We have very, very little control over what happens between now and 30 minutes from now, or now and 2 hours from now. We can almost always pull back and make better decisions when we're looking at that whole picture rather than these micro moments. So that's one piece that you talked about that I think is really, really critical.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how in your line of work being a therapist, how you connect that to, because that makes a lot of sense to me, because as we were talking before we hit record, I openly talk about my therapist, Kelly, that I work with. I've been working with Kelly for the last 8 years. And somebody had asked me why I seem to be so calm in situations like this, where everybody else is like kind of like panicking. Like I had one client use the word panicking this week, and I don't when now that's not to say I don't worry about other things in life. I probably worry about more being a parent than I do an advisor, maybe because I have more control, I guess. But I get this sense that I'm just kind of built to be able to weather these things and be able to at least hope like you do, or help people that are struggling, that are against something like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I actually was just talking with my financial advisor yesterday or the day before. And so, the way you talk about Kelly is how I feel about Bijan, who I've been working with for almost 20 years. And that's what I do to make it through the scary times. I looked at my accounts yesterday and like, oh no. And so I reach out to someone who knows more than I do, right? And we look for help, and we don't have to do these things alone. So it's comforting for me to reach out to my advisor, who's now like family to me and like a friend. And, we have our teams of people, and hear the wisdom that I don't necessarily have to be an expert on this. I can trust, right? I can take good advice. I can let someone say, Jen, we're doing okay. We're on the right track. We're in this for the long run, right? Don't freak out. Don't panic about these little shifts. Very much the way that I, as a therapist, can help my clients have that bird's eye view and pull back and say, I know today feels really hard. Let's say someone's coming in with depression or anxiety, and I can say, I know that you felt differently last week. I've seen you feel differently than this before. Sometimes the other people in our lives, whether it's a professional or a family member or a friend, can give us a little bit different perspective, because our brains and our psychology wants us to think that whatever emotion we're having right now is the last emotion we're ever going to have. And I don't even know why we're wired that way, but we are. Emotions love themselves. They want to stick around. And anxiety is one of those ones that will just burrow in if we let it. And so it's really helpful to recognize that our anxiety too goes up and down over time, and it's going to shift and change. And it's not about those micro movements, more so about, can we pull back and get a better sense of what's actually happening in the long run?
I know we've talked about this before, I believe. I know I mentioned his name, Dan Sullivan, who's authored a great book called The Gap and the Gain. And that was kind of revolutionary for me, that I read probably 2-3 years ago, where it's really, in that book, Dan tries to make the point of like how to measure yourself. And if you're always trying to measure yourself about what's ahead of you, then you're missing it. You're going to be in this, what he calls the gap, versus the gain, where when you look, in order to move forward, you need to look back to where you came from. So how often do you feel like you have to, or you need to remind people of where they came from? So like in example of a portfolio statement, yes, the portfolio may be down 10% year to date, but if you look back 5 years ago, look at where we started.
Pretty often. Yeah, that is one of the things. One of the things I do a lot in my role is kind of hold the memory for my clients, particularly people I've seen for months or maybe even years. It's so helpful to have someone who is not inside your skin, who's keeping track of the ups and downs, who's helping you remember that this too shall pass. No feeling is final. We always make it through things. And personally, I have a mantra like that. I've made it through every hard day of my life. I've made it through every moment I didn't think I could make it through. And, part of what I'm thinking about as we're talking, Paul, is our brain has a few different states of mind that we operate in. And this is very reductionist. So of course there are different states of mind, broadly, that we operate in. But for the purpose of this, we have a kind of a reasonable, rational mind and an emotional mind. And they're both really important. We need them both. And often when I'm teaching this idea, I actually use the example of doing our taxes or investing or something that is involving these concrete numbers and data as a time when it's really helpful to be in our reasonable mind. We need to be in that kind of cool, calm, collected space from time to time. to be able to make decisions without the emotion having a huge impact on what we're deciding. Conversely, our emotional mind is more kind of emotion focused, more hot, more kind of changeable. And that's a great place to be too sometimes. When we're parenting, let's say if our kid is having some great success, we're watching them perform, I don't want to be in reasonable mind. I want to be in that emotional mind because I want to just feel those feelings. More often than not, what we want to tap into is a little bit of both. And I think these kinds of downturns or blips are a great opportunity to practice that. And what that looks like is validating the emotion mind. So saying to ourselves something like, and this touches upon your idea of don't tell people to just stay calm, that when we say just stay calm, we're kind of invalidating the emotional mind, right? Because the emotional mind is saying, I'm not calm. And so what do I do with this? So we can validate it by saying, hey, it makes sense that you're worried about this in real numbers. You just saw your portfolio go down by X amount. And in the long term, what do we know? And that's where we can pull in our advisors or our support system. So holding a space of both and, like we've talked about, okay, mind, it makes sense that you're worried about this. It's scary to see numbers go down. And look at the numbers or look at the graph that Paul's showing us or look at what our advisor is reminding us of over the years. Can I take a long-term perspective here, even while acknowledging that it's scary and stressful, and maybe I need to do something to support myself and my nervous system in the short term while I continue to hold this long-term perspective?
Well, you made me feel really good when you just said that because I know I get a lot out of our conversations, and so I know I'm learning a lot from you as well because when I had a family text me earlier this week that they used the word panicking, my response back to them was, I completely understand. The feeling of panic is a natural emotion going on right now. And I basically followed up and said, it's okay. Just so you know, I'm not panicking. And this is why.
Absolutely. I love that response, Paul, because just like we've talked about in a couple of our episodes, if your response back was, don't panic, no need to worry, that might feel like it's going to be reassuring. And I'm sure on some level it is. And it also might make that person less likely to reach out to you because they might feel silly or, invalidated or like their feelings are wrong. So you're able to hold both.
I also feel like it's like short-sighted as well. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because what we're responding to, if we just say, oh, don't panic, you're fine, we're just responding to that emotion in the moment. We're not responding to the part of each of our brains that also needs some reassurance. So that both and, it makes sense that you feel this way, right? And sometimes as a therapist, I'll say very honestly, I feel that way too, right? Or it makes sense that you worry about the political climate right now. I do too. And what do we know to be true? What have we seen before in the past, right? How do we imagine? Sometimes I like to forecast out. If I were a year from now and I look back at this moment, how important do I think this is actually going to be? Or how much do I think this moment in time is really going to impact me 6 months, a year, even 5 years from now? Sometimes it's helpful to try to get a little bit out of our time frame because what's right in front of us is typically what feels the most real.
Right. So I want to go back and see if I can pull on that thread between what you were talking about between call it the rational mind and the emotional mind. Is how are there things that we can do? And I know you probably do this in therapy with your clients. Is how do we find the harmony between those two? Because, like you mentioned, and when you said that, I automatically went to my daughter's swim meet last weekend, and there was nothing rational about that. That's pure emotion, and I wanted to stay there. I wanted to enjoy those moments, and then I'm flipping right back to like, okay, I've got like 5 tax returns I got to get done. So now I'm like going right back to the rational mind. But how do you find the harmony between making those two worlds work together? Because I talk about this a lot with families where when I'm explaining like what I do, who I am, and how I help families, is that there's this emotional component to your wealth management plan, to your life, and then there's a financial component to your wealth management plan in your life. And I'm trying to figure out how best to find harmony between those two to help achieve your purpose and objectives.
Yeah, it's a good pursuit. And sometimes harmony is the goal where we're really looking for a balance of both. And sometimes it's really more about deciding in the moment. And deciding is maybe a strange word to use here because it's not necessarily a rational decision. Maybe checking in, is this a moment when my emotion mind can be on 100%? When you're at your daughter's game, or, if I'm at my son's concert, I might, if I start noticing, oh, I'm worrying about all these things, or I'm getting into rational mind, I might need to actually turn my mind back and say, I'm here to be here. I'm here to feel. I'm here to be in this moment, have these emotions. Emotion mind is typically more present moment and sometimes can be future focused if it becomes anxiety focused. Oh no, the worst is going to happen. I won't be able to cope with it. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, I need to feel this. I need to feel this emotion. It might not even be positive emotions. So, for example, grief. Sometimes we need to just feel that if we've lost someone or if we are really scared. It's okay to actually feel those feelings for a period of time. And then conversely, if I'm sitting down and collecting all of my documents for my taxes or something, if I notice that I'm falling into emotion mind and starting to worry, I might say to myself, this is a time to actually be more in your reasonable mind, to focus on the numbers, get those spreadsheets going, whatever it is. The overlap is, I think of a Venn diagram where it's not 100% overlap, where we need to be able to access both. Typically, that idea of the overlap in the therapy that I'm referring to, which is called dialectical behavior therapy, and I think we've mentioned this briefly, the idea that two things that seem opposite can be true at the same time.
Right, yes.
Right? And that overlap is, yes, right now, it makes sense that I'm feeling this feeling, and in the long term, it will be in my best interest to do X. So it's really taking into account the both andness of that I can have emotions about it and I can make a decision that's in my best interest in the long term. And it's actually settling to think of it in this both and way rather than trying to decide, is this something I need to worry about or is this something I need to plan for? It may be both, and letting there be that internal validation, and maybe even working with your family and friends to try to increase that external validation of those emotions so that we don't have to fight so hard to explain why we're worried about it, right? If I can say to myself, yeah, it makes sense that I worry about that, then I've gotten that validation and I don't have to continue to worry about it as much.
That's a really good point. Like, I like how you use that phrase, like, you don't have to fight so hard. Because the other thing I was thinking about as I was listening to you explain that is just like probably in financial planning and in therapy, there's no like one silver bullet answer.
Mm-hmm.
And as you pointed out, it's more of a feel for deciding what space you need to be in versus the other. And like you just pointed out, and we've talked about before, is having two competing thoughts in your mind at the same time and they both be true.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, for example, in my life, and I really did have this conversation with my friend and financial advisor, not, just a day or two ago. And when I got off the phone with him, I said, okay, he validated how I was feeling. He told me the plan, right? And he has a plan and I trust him enough to follow that plan. And what I was able to say to myself is, okay, then I don't need to worry about this. Right? I trust that my emotions aren't ridiculous. And I also know that rationally we have a plan and I'm going to just follow that plan. And, I'm about the same age as you, Paul. So I'm just thinking this is a long-term plan. And so I'm going to just try to be with that along with the feelings that I'm having. I'm not going to try to talk the feelings down or tell myself to calm down. That tends to make them bigger. I'm going to just acknowledge that this is not my area of expertise. And I have someone on my team whose area it is his expertise.
When you go to try to put something like that down, is it, I'm trying to think of the right way to ask or explain this. When you're trying to put anxiety down, is one mechanism to do that the ability to walk away and have something to walk away to that? I want to say distraction, but I don't know if that actually means distraction, like to get your mind off it. Like, that you should not be worrying about this, but in order to not worry about it, I need to go do something else. That's either something I need to do, something that's enjoyable, whatever it may be.
Yep. Yep, you're exactly right. And there are a couple different ways that I think about it. Often I like to rate the emotion almost on like a 0 to 10 scale in terms of intensity. So anxiety is probably the emotion that's coming up a lot right now when we think about finances and see these, big blips or big drops. And if my anxiety is at, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10, really, really high, distraction is probably my best bet. And it's really okay because we're not going to distract forever. And, we don't want to distract forever. Typically, it doesn't take forever to distract away down from a 10 to like a 6 or a 7, let's say. And distraction might be exactly that, of doing some exercise, having a different kind of conversation with somebody, going and just doing something different. It could also be a time to pull in one of the other things we've talked about, which is, where are my values pointing me right now? What's some values-based activity that I could do? And it's the same thing I advise if we're having a lot of political anxiety. Is there something in line with your values that you can do, either about that topic or just something else that makes you feel like you're doing something that's important to you? It really is okay to distract away temporarily. And then the other thing I like to talk about with anxiety in particular is that we can set aside what we call worry time or anxiety time, where if there is something that feels like it needs our attention, and that's a real question to think about, does this need my attention in any meaningful way? If it feels like it does, that's fine. Let's schedule that time. So maybe we have worry time from 6 to 6:30 p.m. And what that does in our minds is it is basically validating that emotion, saying, I will worry about this thing, whatever it is. I promise I'll come back to it. I'm just not going to do it right now. And then when that worry time comes, go ahead and research, get the information you need, have the conversations you need, and then you can put it away. It's different than shoving it down, refusing to look at it. It's just having it be in a more circumscribed space and time.
It's interesting you mentioned about scheduling like that time to worry, because I always recall this Joel Osteen podcast episode where he gives this example about a guy that had this tree outside of the door to his house. And he would always touch it and sometimes talk to it before he went into his house. And one day he was with somebody else. He's like, what are you doing? Like, what is that about? He's like, well, that's my worry tree. It's like, I get my worries out from, the long day at work or whatever it may be, so that I'm not taking it inside to my family when I get into the door.
Exactly. Well, and you referenced at the beginning of our conversation today what we were talking about offline before we started. And if it's okay, I want to just say out loud what you said to me that you've been doing, which is you're keeping a gratitude list in the morning. And that's a very powerful way to work with some of the anxiety that can come up, whether it's a gratitude list or what I like to do is a little bit different, which is like things I'm proud of myself for at the end of the day. But it's a similar framework, which is, can I train my mind to also notice the positive? Because it's there too. It's not a hack. It's not, tricking ourselves into thinking good stuff is happening. Good stuff is happening. Scary stuff is happening too. And so when you wake up and you write down 3 things you're grateful for, or when I get to the end of my day and I write down 3 things I'm proud of myself for, what our brains are doing in the 24 hours between those times is noticing those things, really capturing those things and paying attention to them. And they get to have equal weight with the scariness or what we might see if we're doom scrolling or something like that. So it's a really powerful practice to get our brains thinking about what's going right too, because we're biologically predisposed to focus on what's going wrong. And it's not the only thing that's happening in our world.
Well, the one, I think, I don't know, it may be one of your favorite words, but the word I was thinking of was agency. Because you have agency is you have control over what you're choosing or your thoughts. And, to set that up, I'm in a kind of like a group therapy of other financial advisors that's led by a licensed therapist. And she asked me like, what I thought was one of the biggest changes as to why I'm so calm, like during tax season, during political upheaval, and during like tax season. And I said, well, the one thing I can concretely put my fingers on is that I started writing down these 3 things every day for the most part, like 2.5 years ago. And just like we have negative compounding, we can have positive compounding as well. And I think that just over time that has built up, because I'll admit it. Like if you talk to some of my close friends, like they would probably tell me like, yeah, Paul can be like Debbie Downer sometimes. He can have a pessimistic tilt to him. And I could see how that was impacting the portfolio manager side of what I do, that role that I fill as an advisor for the families I work with. And going back to the S&P 500 chart from my date of birth, what's it doing? It's going from bottom left to upper right. And so I'm like, I need to focus, I need to take agency and focus on being more positive. And just like you said, that doesn't mean that negative things don't happen. I'm not like, sticking my head in the sand, yet, things happen. But over the long period of time, we live in a great country with great people trying to do great things. And I think that's often lost by, headline news. And so I've literally tried to like start rewiring my brain to be more positive, because one, I would just love to be more positive and have that bias tilt. But also in research that I've done, I think that I can be a better advisor. I can be a better portfolio manager. I can be a better husband. I can be a better father by taking that approach versus the opposite.
You're exactly right. And you are rewiring your brain when you do that, which is so cool, because our brains work on these neural pathways that get codified over time. And we can get these super highways in our brain. If what we focus on is what's not going well, what's scary, that gets to be a faster and faster and faster connection. And so it may initially be a little bit of a deer path, like a bushwhacking experience, to try to touch in on gratitude or pride or hope or any of these emotions that maybe we don't visit as often. They're still there. And so when we do that practice over and over again, we start to make that pathway cleaner and faster. And it's a really powerful practice we can do. One little, and for those of you who aren't watching, I'm putting my hand on kind of my upper chest, because this is a practice that I try to do to really notice those moments of calm and safety. We're familiar with the concept of triggers, right? Those moments that unbidden make us scared or remember a trauma or something that's really hard. There's a corresponding idea of what we think of as glimmers, which are moments of connection, moments of safety. Maybe you're talking with someone and you notice they're making a kind face, or you trust them, or maybe you notice that you feel good in your body, which we don't always notice. We notice if we feel pain in our body. We don't always notice if we feel comfort in our body. So even those moments, part of a gratitude practice can be, wow, what's not hurting? What's not feeling scary? Who do I feel safe with? And finding a way to actually, I do a physical cue, like just pressing on my upper chest. Some people like to touch their face or just notice with their hands. But there is some real power in having these reminders that in this moment, I'm okay. In this moment, I feel safe with you. In this moment, I feel safe and connected in my body. Maybe I can look around my environment if I start to feel panicky or anxious. What are cues in my environment that I'm safe here? Who are people that I feel safe with? Because all of that is happening too. And so just like that, what we were talking about with the emotion mind, when we feel like those big emotions, our body is going to respond to that and hyper focus in on that, to the expense of everything else in our peripheral vision. And so we have agency. You're right. That is one of my favorite words. We have agency when we start saying, okay, what else is happening? What else is true? What other information can I bring in here?
Well, not that I ever wish for upheaval and chaos, but I swear we seem to do our best work when that happens. But this has been yet another amazing conversation. And again, I encourage everyone that's listening, if you have thoughts or questions or ideas or topics that you want Dr. Jen and myself to cover during our time together, please send those in. And like we said, we did a whole episode on a listener question last month or the month before. And so we do read all your emails that come in. And Dr. Jen, great conversation as always.
Thanks, Paul. I look forward to seeing you soon.
You too. Thank you. So there's always a lot to unpack when I have these conversations with Dr. Jen. I think she is a great resource for not only myself, but for all of you listening, or at least I hope that you find that helpful. A few key takeaways from this conversation was, one, there's no silver bullet to trying to find the harmony between this rational and emotional mindset that we had talked about. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes awareness. So recognizing when to lean in to being rational and when to lean into being emotional is critical. And like we talked about, sometimes there's situations where you need to hold two competing thoughts in your mind at the same time, and that's okay. Another key takeaway was managing anxiety with a long-term perspective. As I mentioned, I always like to show families I work with the chart of the S&P 500 from the time that I was born in 1976 until today. And it goes from bottom left to upper right. But there's a lot of noise in between. It's not a straight up linear progression. Just like our lives are not a straight up linear progression. And I think the last thing I want to mention is this building resilience through gratefulness. And I gave my own example of I start my day typically writing down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And I've been doing this for 2.5 years now. And I think it's made a noticeable change, or at least I hope it has, in my own mindset with those that I work with, including my family, my kids, Teresa, my wife, the Tama families I work with, that it helps to give me a better outlook on how to support the people I care about most in my life. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.